As the debate around a uniform civil code gains momentum, with several religious and cultural groups writing to the Law Commission and expressing their dissatisfaction, at the same time pointing out the timing of this formulation of the UCC, we are today joined by a panel who will help us to understand the issue in its entirety and also to clear some of the doubts that are being raised, especially by the opposition, where they allege that the center's move to enforce the UCC at this time, especially a majoritarian move, which may seem like a majoritarian principles overlooking the principles of equality. We are joined by Ms. Patricia Mukim. She's the editor of Shillong Times and a senior journalist. By Puneet Nicholas Yadav. He's a senior journalist with the Federal, and Zakia Soman, a prominent women's rights activist. So let me begin the program with Ms. Mukim. PM Modi, and by extension, the BJP, has centered its pitch for the Uniform Civil Code around the concept of constitutional equality and the larger question of gender justice and uniformity in family laws. Do you think the UCC can fulfill these objectives?
There are two ways of looking at it. On the one hand, yes, when you look at especially the Muslim laws, personal laws, they are very gender biased in many ways because you have triple talaq, you have all those. Even in traditional tribal societies, though we may appear to be, very gender just or very an equitable society, but women are not allowed to hold office in traditional institutions. Therefore, they're kept out of the grassroots politics. However, because we also have the sixth schedule of the constitution in tribal areas, and the sixth schedule was created essentially to protect these customary laws and practices. So this comes into immediate conflict with the UCC, Uniform Civil Code. Also, then you have the Christian marriage laws, of course, Christianity doesn't allow for divorce, but you have the Christian marriage laws. Again, these religious dicta or religious modes of behavior, they come into conflict with the Uniform Civil Code. Also, see, India calls itself a nation. But what is a nation state? A nation state has one sort of race, one language, one culture. We are several nations. This country is several nations with several diverse races, customs, food habits, and everything. It becomes very difficult to have a uniform civil code. Think of it this way. The BJP has already banned beef eating in large parts of the country. Suppose the Uniform Civil Code also, intrudes into this food habit of the tribals. What do we do then? So I don't believe that at this juncture that you can bring in a uniform civil code, essentially because it is also populist. It's meant for the BJP to win the next elections, 2024. Last evening, I heard Prime Minister Modi saying, if we are in one family, can you expect to have different laws for different members of the family? Right. Well, we are not one family. Look at what's happening in Manipur and nobody cares a hoot. So where is that one family business,
Okay. Puneet, just to take Ms. Mukim's point forward, we have heard the Prime Minister in Madhya Pradesh in very recent, in the last few days, and also the top BJP party leaders. Whenever they talk about the Uniform Civil Code, they are invoking the Article 44. But in the same hand, there's a sort of neglect of the sixth schedule, which Ms. Mukim just mentioned. So, I mean, are they compatible? Obviously, they are not, right?
See, Siddharth, compatibility of Article 371 and whatever is laid out in Part 4 of the Constitution, which are, or specifically with regard to the Uniform Civil Code, which is Article 44. is a different matter altogether. And I think, I mean, that is an obvious gray area. And, ever since this talk about the Uniform Civil Code has started, and particularly over the last few days, uh, I think the BJP has itself sort of exposed and diluted its position on the UCC, because you've had uh, the the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Social Justice, Mr. Sushil Modi, who's the BJP leader, say that the Uniform Civil Code will not apply to tribal communities,
Right.
and we will
Yeah.
respect their customs. And
Yeah.
then you had Mr. S.P. Singh Baghel, who was formerly the MOS in the Ministry of Law and Justice, who is currently, I believe, the MOS in the Ministry of Health, who gave a statement the other day saying the Uniform Civil Code will not apply to the northeastern states.
Mhm.
So if you are not going to apply, if you call it a Uniform Civil Code, and then you exclude certain categories from
Right. It's
what
not
is
uniform, right? Yeah.
supposedly
Yeah.
uniform,
Yeah.
the whole concept of a Uniform Civil Code itself becomes a myth. But
Absolutely.
I think the more important aspect that needs to be discussed, which unfortunately gets lost in this din, because Uniform Civil Code is also a politically very, very divisive and communally polarizing issue, or it has been made to appear like one, is the application of the Uniform Civil Code to other religious denominations besides the Muslims. I personally believe that we spend a lot of time analyzing how it is going to apply to the Muslim community vis-a-vis the Sharia and the
Muslim
personal laws
personal
of
law.
governing the Muslims.
Mhm.
But what gets lost in this din is how detrimental it would be to our customs and practices and personal laws that are applied to the also the Hindu community to a large extent, but other religious minorities too. And there is a myth that has been propagated over the years, which unfortunately, even those, even among the liberals and among people who have a progressive mindset, has kind of gained traction, that the Hindus have a common law, and every Hindu is governed by a common Hindu code, while the Muslims and the others, primarily the Muslims, are governed by a separate set of personal laws, which should not be the case. Now, this myth needs to be broken. The Hindus do not have a common law. The Hindu code in itself is a set of three separate laws,
Yeah. Yeah. I
and
was
there are serious points of divergence between the various elements of the Hindu code, the Hindu Marriage Act, the Succession Act, the Adoption
exactly
Act, the
guardianship,
Guardianship
right?
Act, etc., and the Special Marriages Act, which also applies to Hindus and other religious communities. And there are various exceptions that are granted. So, what uniformity is being talked about with regard to the Hindus?
Right. I was just coming to that point, Puneet. You have raised a very important point. You have said that the Hindu code bill itself is not a monolithic, a monolithic framework.
Yeah.
It is obviously broken down into four subparts. Just to get Ms. Soman in this, in what we have seen over the last and precisely over the last 2 days, the All India Muslim Personnel Board's 100-page recommendation to the Law Commission, they have raised two very important points. One, they say, is that the Constitution itself is not uniform, as special rights are given to special people, a section of people, which is enumerated very well in the Constitution. And secondly, they say is the Muslim law is directly derived from the Holy Quran, and it's a issue of identity. So when it is a question of identity, how do you think, obviously they are not going to accept it. But on the other hand, the Indian Muslims for Secular Democracy, they have accepted and they have actually supported the proposal for Uniform Civil Code, saying that if it's religion neutral and gender just, we are up for it. So why the disparity among a group of Muslims, or is there something more to it? Ms. Zakia Suman, can we get your point on this?
So, yeah, Siddharth. So the likes of the Muslim Personal Law Board are part of the problem. And you cannot compare their views with with a group like Indian Muslims for Secular Democracy, of which I'm also a member, and I've also signed that statement. See, as was just now said by Ms. Mukim, we have to keep in mind that this is a usually politicized issue. And mainly it is because of the Hindutva politics, that it's part of the BJP's manifesto, and BJP is pushing for it. At the same time, the resistance by the Muslim clergy to any talk of reform has contributed to the politicization of this issue. Because fundamentally, Uniform Civil Code was about gender justice and gender equality, as it was, championed by Nehru and Ambedkar and Rajkumari Ambedkar and people like that. And they were forced to abandon the idea because of opposition from various conservative quarters. But then a kind of a solution was found to the questions of gender, particularly in marriage and family, through the codified set of Hindu family laws. And also there has been a substantive reform in the Christian family laws. Like till 20 years ago, Christian women could not initiate and take divorce, which they are now able to do. A 2001 amendment, under the Indian Divorce Act, they are able to initiate and take divorce. But thanks to the resistance to reform by the Muslim clergy, Muslim women have been left without any legal protection in matters of marriage and family. As a result, we have child marriages because puberty is considered the age of marriage. As a result, we have unilateral divorce. Despite instant triple talaq being nullified by the Supreme Court, still divorce remains unilateral in the Muslim community. We also have the question of more than one wives. We also have a denial of custody and guardianship to children. So, when Siddharth, to come back to your question, when you said that when the Muslim Personal Law Board is saying that this is our, something like to the effect that this is our God-given law, that's why it cannot.
They have used the term called identity, and they have emphasized on this point.
Yeah. So laws, by definition, laws are man-made. There's nothing divine about laws. That's why, across various Muslim countries, in one Muslim country, the age of marriage is 17. In another Muslim country, it is 15 for the girls. So two different Muslim countries have two different sets of laws. That proves there's nothing divine about it. They are very much man-made. We all know that. And Muslim Personal Law Board has been hugely instrumental ever since the days of Shah Banu in 1985 to contribute to this whole conundrum, which feeds into the Hindutva propaganda about Muslims being backward, about Muslims being conservative. Look at the way Muslim women are being shortchanged. And they are still, unfortunately, I would say they are still caught up in the mindset of the 80s. They are not able to see, that the world has changed and even the Muslims have changed. So I'm afraid opposition coming from there is everything along expected lines, but that will further aid the polarization and the objectives of the BJP through, because of which they made this announcement in the first place.
But Ms. Suman, Ms. Suman, if I was just to get some clarity on this, you have also spoken about triple talaq, and even several Muslim women have also raised this point that merely criminalizing an act, criminalizing triple talaq does not ensure gender justice. What we have seen is that although the act is criminalized, but what about the question of maintenance? What about the question of a livelihood, and so on and so forth? So these are actually issues that are actually very important. So how do we address this? Merely criminalizing an act does not, make that kind of a social reform or that kind of an impact.
Yeah, so that was the problem on the part of the government when the law was brought. But you cannot deny the fact that thanks to the women-led movement against triple talaq, its incidence has usually gone down. And although this opposition to criminalization has been there, I don't know although I work on these issues, I have not come across a single man who has been sent to jail. So let's not, this is also on the one hand, there is BJP's politics. On the other hand, there is the politics of the opposition parties. And none of the political parties of all hues, be they of whichever hue, they don't care about gender justice. Nobody cares about women. Everybody wants to be, in power. Somebody wants to be in power by polarizing the public. Somebody wants to be in power by sort of, pandering to certain voices, but I don't think anybody really cares about what happens to the women. Abolition of triple talaq has been a good thing. It has had a positive effect. The incidence has gone down drastically, but still, as I said, divorce remains unilateral within the Muslim community, and therefore the need to drastically reform Muslim personal law and to pass a set of codified Muslim family laws, to make Quran given rights a reality. You have to have, legal backing, because otherwise, without that, it will continue to be what it is today.
Okay. Ms. Mokim, if I could get you on in this point, especially with what Puneet raised a couple of minutes back, that when a delegation from Nagaland was meeting the Home Minister, he had indicated that Christians and some pockets of the tribal areas would be exempted from the UCC. So, is it enough to actually assuage the fear that UCC will not be uniformly applied to the tribal areas?
See,
I'm
the
talking
problem,
especially in terms of Northeast.
the problem today is that we haven't seen how it's going to play out. We don't have the copy of the proposed bill. Where's the copy? Nobody has seen it. So we don't really know what's in that bill. We don't know how it will impact us. We only know of Article 44, what it says, that the state should attempt to bring about a uniform civil code. That's all we know. And now people here are asking, if this becomes a law, does it mean then that there will be no caste system among the Hindus? Yeah. Will it equalize everything? And will
Absolutely.
we, the tribes, lose our scheduled tribe status, and all the privileges that come with that? These are nagging at our minds because we haven't seen the bill. We don't know how it looks like and what it proposes really. And Ms. Zakia Soman had spoken about the Christian Marriage Act being reformed. The problem is that there is not one denomination in Christianity. We have different denominations, and the Roman Catholics do not allow divorce. It's very clear that if you want to separate, you do that on your own, and the church does not condone that at all. So you somehow you're excommunicated or whatever. That again is a problem, and yeah, so the concern now is about our food habits, is about us losing our scheduled tribe status, and then maybe subsequently, imposing other uniformities that exist in the rest of the country. And we've always believed that we cannot be, we are not a monolith. We are we are a diverse country, which is why I think there was a lot of debate on Article 44 even in the past. That's why it was kept as a directive principle only.
Right. So Puneet, just to get your point on this, I think Ms. Mukim has raised a very, very important or a very crucial aspect, saying that we don't know whether the UCC will do away with the caste system, as we have seen even day before yesterday, a horrendous caste incident took place in Madhya Pradesh. So will it address these issues, or it is only been played up, it's only being propped up in terms of family laws, in terms of personal laws? But what about
No,
the underlying? Yeah, please go on. Yeah.
I think we're much as one would want the Uniform Civil Code to address, if at all it is a good law, and there's a big question mark on that. But if it does come into play, and if it is a just law, I think we're mixing the issues here. The caste system is a very separate issue. And when you talk about uniform civil law or a civil code, you're basically talking about marriage, divorce, inheritance, laws governing those things. But, you know, a point that Ms. Mukhim made and which Satya also made, I'd like to, talk about the Constituent Assembly debates that happened on the Uniform Civil Code, and which finally gave you the formulation under Article 44 of the Uniform Civil Code as part of Part 4 of the Constitution, which is the Directive Principles of State Policy. Now, there is no doubt that Uniform Civil Code was discussed at length in the Constituent Assembly. But there is a reason why it was not brought on the statute. And in fact, if you look at the various articles under Part 4, which deals with directive principles of state policy, in matters of law, what is most important is the semantics, the language in which that law has been written. And that is how that particular law is to be interpreted. That is what gives the law that meaning. If you read the directive principles of state policy, the various articles, and they're not very long, so it doesn't take a lot of time. But if you read on from Article 39, 38, 39 onwards to Article 51, and these are the articles which talk about the various directive principles, Article 44 being Uniform Civil Code. The formulation of Article 44 possibly tells you why the state did not go all hog to make a Uniform Civil Code. Because while all the other articles of directive principles talk about in terms of their language, they mention, for instance, just preceding Article 44, Article 43 deals with the directive principle of a living wage, the state's responsibility to give its citizens a living wage. And the formulation there is that the state shall endeavor by a suitable legislation to provide a living wage to the citizens, etc., etc. Similarly, there are other, directive principles that follow, which regard other policy matters on other rights that the citizens should have. There again, the formulation is shall endeavor, variously, but shall endeavor through directing a policy, shall endeavor through a legislation, shall endeavor through economic policy. It's only in the matter of the Uniform Civil Code where Article 44 merely says, and it's just a one-line mention in the Constitution, where it says that the state shall endeavor to secure for the citizens a uniform civil code. They do not talk about a legislation. They do not talk about even a policy framework. They simply say that the state shall endeavor. And the reason for that can be found in the Constituent Assembly debates, because the submissions that were made by the founding fathers was that there is a great amount of diversity, and that is what makes India thrive as a country. You have to read this, possibly, in my view, with Article 51 of the Constitution, which talks about fundamental rights that the citizens of the country have, and the state has towards the citizens of the country. And if you simply talk about Article 51, and again, there are various fundamental rights that are written down, as part of Article 51 from point A to point, I think, to point F and onwards. There are two very, very important points which we very conveniently forget when we talk about Uniform Civil Code. You have Article 51AE, which talks about this need of the state and the fundamental rights of the citizens to promote harmony and the spirit of brotherhood amongst all people of all linguistic, regional, and religious denominations. And it talks about the subsequent part of it, which is part F, talks about the fundamental duty towards preserving heritage and composite culture. Now, when you talk about a uniform civil code and you talk about disrupting customs, you talk about disrupting, unfortunately, in the current sense, the bonhomie, the brotherhood that, the Constitution wants the Indian citizens to preserve, then where are you following Article 51? You're in direct contravention of that. So
Puneet,
my point here is, while it is all very, and there is absolutely no doubt that various personal laws, and maybe particularly the personal laws of the Muslims, need a lot of reform. But I have very serious doubts on whether a uniform civil code is the way forward. I would rather wish that the conservative elements within the various religious and caste, community, denominations would sit down and give up their regressive stand on various personal laws and talk about codifying their individual personal laws. And that is what the Law Commission's 21st report also said.
right.
It
I
said
was,
that
yeah.
the need is to codify personal laws and
Absolutely.
not a uniform civil code. So
Right,
that is essential.
So, Puneet, correct me if I'm wrong. Even in the Constituent Assembly debates, Ambedkar did not immediately bet for the UCC. He also played a wait and watch game. He also said that it needs to be included, but this is not the need of the hour, that UCC needs immediate implementation, isn't it?
I would not put it in those many words about him waiting and watching, but I would certainly say that yes, if you go through his submissions, while he talked about progressive reforms within communities, he was not categorical in the need for a UCC. Neither was the man that the BJP wants to appropriate and has been trying to appropriate, which is Sardar Patel.
Patel,
And Sardar Patel, in fact, was extremely against a uniform civil code, and he talked about the damage it would do to our diversity and our customs.
Yeah, social fabric,
Now,
right.
I mean, Miss Mukhim would perhaps correct me, and I hope she would correct me if I'm wrong. When you talk about the northeastern states, I mean, let's forget for a moment that the government has said that they are going to exempt the northeastern states, because we don't know. We don't even have a draft of the law, so we don't know what shape it would ultimately
this is
take.
merely based on
But
news reports, right? Yeah.
precisely. But let's talk about the northeastern states. Even among, do you know how many tribal communities are recognized among the northeastern states? How many ethnic groups and tribal communities? 220. There are 220.
No. If you read B.G. Verghese's book, Northeast Resurgent, he says there are 238 ethnic communities. 238 and counting, because there are smaller tribes. You must have read Benedict Anderson's book, Imagined Communities. We are exactly that. A small group imagines itself to be different and then forms a new group. So every day there is one group, and Verghese did say that 238 ethnic communities and counting.
Yeah.
And some of them, of course, have merged themselves with stronger groups, especially during those Naga Kuki conflicts of the 90s. The smaller ethnic communities decided to band with the Nagas, because the Nagas, they felt, were stronger and could defend them. So it's like that. It's a changing scenario.
Yeah. So the point is, let's see. The fact is that there is immense diversity in the Northeast in terms of the communities that live in that part of the country. What the Indian mainland does or how it treats the Northeast is a different issue altogether, and I mean, one can go at length on that. But the point is, when you have to respect the northeastern states, if you're talking about a uniform civil code which is just to its citizens, look at the practices prevalent in these communities. You have matrilineal societies. You have societies, say, among the Khasis and the residents of the Jaintia Hills, and in Mizoram, in other states, where one community may say that the right to inheritance, is to the eldest son. The other community may say the right to inheritance is for the youngest son. There
Youngest
are
daughter.
communities where
In
the
my
youngest
I'm a Khasi, so in my community, which is matrilineal, the youngest daughter inherits ancestral property. So
Absolutely.
yeah. And these might change if with the uniform civil code, all these might change, right? So you're
Exactly.
changing the basic
Similarly, in
Yeah.
Kerala,
So
the
even
Nayars are a matrilineal society.
right.
So are you going to, when you say uniform, are you going to then go by a majority view and say that no, the majority of the country follows patriarchy and a patriarchal system,
Right.
so let everybody follow, a male inheritance model, or the eldest son, inheriting everything? Or if you don't do that and you still call it uniform civil code, how is it uniform?
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know. Essentially, the problem with the Indian Constitution itself is that it is a cut and paste job of the 1935 Government of India
Government
Act.
of India Act here.
So because the British had one race, one law, one everything, they thought that they would implant all that in India. Now, when India became a sovereign country, I've always wondered why it continued with these regressive colonial laws. And this can be, you can extend this to so many other areas like the Indian Police Act, like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which continue to this day. Because I come back again to this point that we are not a nation as defined by Eurocentric academics. We're not a nation by any stretch of imagination. We are several nations. And to try and force us to be one nation, look at what is happening in Manipur, where 2 or 3 major communities living together cannot see eye to eye on anything. How do you implement a uniform civil code there? You already have bloodshed without that. You'll have more bloodshed and killing after that, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. That is a very important point. Ms. Soman, if I was just to quote the 21st Law Commission, it had recommended that discriminatory practices and prejudices and stereotypes within particular religion and personal laws should be studied and amended henceforth. So, isn't if we see barely in terms of the coinage, isn't the new the step towards the UCC a push in that direction? Can we say it's a push in that direction?
Uh, as was said, there is no clarity because there is no framework, no draft, nothing available. And there are different kinds of media reports. There's a huge diversity, I would say, even in the media reports, So, for instance, today, the latest reports are, yesterday, sorry, that the push is going to be only eradicating these practices, which are unfair to women, namely the child marriage, namely the practice of polygamy, namely the denial of sharing property. So if that is going to be the thrust of this whole thing, then certainly it doesn't cover the whole nation. And in any case, the spirit of this whole uniform civil code or common law, the stress is not so much on uniformity. Uniformity in itself would be, rigid or would be meaningless. The uniformity is, is a kind of a uniformity of purpose, that we cannot allow misogynist and discriminatory practices to prevail in the name of personal laws, in the name of customs, in the name of traditions. So it is that uniformity of purpose. That is the spirit in my understanding. But alas, everything in our country is dictated by the politics. And there is, one major dimension of the Hindutva politics is, and it's not without merit, because the Muslims have been refusing to reform the law, and there is a huge, public sentiment also. Even well-meaning people today, they are not able to understand, because the way this debate has been, positioned, as though the only it's a very progressive measure and the only people who are opposing it are the Muslims. So even well-meaning people are not able to understand why are the Muslims opposing it. And it's true that when you are claiming that there is not much incidence of polygamy, then why this insistence on having it as a legal right? You know, see, even just when the Hindu marriage law came, even the Hindus were used to having, elite Hindus used to have 3-4 wives. So that has gone because of bigamy law. They used to have child brides, 13-year-old girls, 14-year-old girls as brides, which is now legally not possible. So even the majority community has undergone reform. I'm not saying that, you know, patriarchy is eliminated and Hindu women have got all the rights. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there is substantive legal provisions working in that direction, which is solely, you know, not the case at all as far as the Muslims is concerned. So this talk about Siddharth, what you were saying, that this talk about that it will only be limited to reforming certain personal laws, then it boils down to what? It boils down to the child marriages amongst Muslims, the practice of polygamy, things like nikah halala. And I really hope it goes further and it becomes, you know, it gives custody and guardianship of children to the mother, and it also gives share in property, because it's a Quranic right, which is really not translated into reality.
Okay, Puneet, if I could just get your point on this. If we are saying that, as it has been indicated, in during this debate, as if we are saying that the UCC, the merely the formulation of the UCC is, it's problematic. If it has to address the problems it actually wants to, there has to be a greater consultation, a greater discussion amongst various stakeholders. So what would be your prescription if we are to achieve something like UCC? What would that be, and how can that be achieved? What would be that prescription?
No, well, see, I'm nobody to give a prescription, and certainly this is not a government that takes prescriptions from people. But as I said, I do not see the need for a uniform civil code. What you need is reforms and codification of existing personal laws and reforms within those personal laws. Why
But
should
if,
you
but
have
yeah, just
uniformity?
sorry to interject. Sorry to interject. As Ms. Soman has said, that the clergy is just refusing to accept those reforms. Just to undertake the reforms. So if the clergy is
I
refusing,
completely understand that, and I agree to a great extent with what Ms. Soman has said. But my point is that when you talk about reform, uh, you know, there are various ways of bringing in reform within personal laws. I'm not saying that the clergy has to do it. There are various ways. I mean, ultimately instant triple talaq, when it was struck down, and I agree that it was a very long struggle, and kudos to the people who were part of that struggle, including Ms. Soman, for staying that course. But it was struck down by the Supreme Court. What the government did subsequently with that law, which in my view was a very poorly made law, is a different matter. But it was ultimately struck down by the courts of the highest court of the land. Polygamy is also pending adjudication. Nikah halala is pending adjudication in the Supreme Court. The delays in the Supreme Court, yes, that is a different ballgame altogether, and there are different factors involved there. So I'm not saying that the clergy has to bring in the reform, but there are various outlets through which reform can be brought. And also, let me please make this point here that there is an impression, and yes, I'm not saying it's without merit. There is an impression that the issue of polygamy or the issue of poor treatment or bad treatment being meted out to women, daughters or daughters-in-law, etc., is unique only to the Muslims. I'm sorry, none of these are unique to the Muslims. In India. In fact, if you look at the NFHS report, the NFHS survey, polygamy is, you'll find that in various other Hindu denominations also. So while the Hindu laws ban polygamy, and of course the Muslim personal law does not, uh, it's wrong to say that there is no polygamy happening among the Hindus or among the tribals, who the BJP prefers to bracket as Hindus. There is polygamy happening there. You also, a lot of eyes and eyebrows are raised on the Muslims on the issue of what we call in law consanguine marriages, or marriages among cousins, as if it's something that is unique only to the Muslims. You have consanguine marriages happening among the Hindus of Tamil Nadu, among the Hindus of Karnataka, among the Hindus of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. And again, if you go through the the latest NFHS report, the issue of consanguine marriages is higher among Hindus of South India than it is among Muslims. The other issue that is constantly raked up to justify the need for a uniform civil code by those elements who think that a uniform civil code would put the Muslims in their right place is that Muslims, I mean, it's linked to the previous 2 points that I made, that the Muslims are very unjust to their women, while the Hindus are not. Now, please tell me, fine, you have struck down instant triple talaq, and that's definitely a very, very welcome move. What happens to Hindu women who are abandoned in marriages?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is there a law to stop the abandoning of Hindu women or women of other religions?
No, look at us. Look at us in Meghalaya. There are 42% of households that are led by single women because they've been abandoned. You may bring in a law, but the implementation part is so very weak, or it doesn't exist at all. Yeah. And I'm wondering why this selective use of certain directive principles. Why not 48A, for instance, to improve, to sustain the environment, because we are in such a crisis, a climate crisis. Why not those? Why this uniform civil code? Isn't it meant to just polarize us?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And Siddhartha, if I might just add,
please.
This is something that has been talked about very frequently, and even unfortunate. It's actually very unfortunate that even the Supreme Court a couple of years back went to the extent of saying that Goa, which supposedly has a common civil code, the Supreme Court said it's a shining example of a uniform civil code. Now,
it's actually a thing of the colonial law. Yeah.
No, forget colonial. A law may be colonial, but it may still be a good law. I'm not going into that. But the point is, if you read the Goa Civil Code, which of course borrows very heavily from the Portuguese law,
right. Yeah.
It has extremely regressive elements. For instance, I'll give you just one example. Polygamy, everyone has a problem with, and polygamy is banned. Polygamy or bigamy, whichever way you want to talk about. Under the Goa Civil Code, if there is a married couple and the woman has, and it has to only be a Hindu, it only applies if you are a Hindu. The Muslims or the Christians living in Goa don't have that right. Okay? So, one, there is no commonality or uniformity to begin with. And second, when I talk about how regressive it is, it talks about how if there is a Hindu couple where the woman has reached the age of 30 but has not conceived a male child, then the man can marry again.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, and that is a law for the Hindus. It does not apply to the Muslims of Goa or the Christians of Goa. So what? So is that progressive in Hindu law? And
that's
are you going to adopt
so
that?
gender discriminatory, no?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if you take these points which all the panelists are making, Puneet, obviously you're also stating the same thing. It's a selective targeting at, and we can see barely a few months before the elections, there is a certain political agenda to this.
There is.
It reeks of a political agenda.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
the whole stress has been taken away from gender justice, and it is more on the uniformity, you know, this whole
Right,
sloganeering, one
right.
nation, one law, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
And that is the unfortunate part, that while you need reform, desperately need reform in personal laws, the entire debate has been muddled into either the binary of a Hindu versus Muslim, or the binaries of politics of, you're a BJP supporter if you're supporting Uniform Civil Code, and you're an anti-national opposition wala if you're not supporting the Uniform Civil Code. And the actual talk of reform, which is required across religious and caste
Of course.
denominations,
Yes.
has been relegated to the backseat.
And there's another point that I wish to make. If a tribal from the Northeast lives in a place, in a state away from the region, will the Uniform Civil Code apply to that person? You know, because if it's if it's a region that has been sort of segregated from the Uniform Civil Code, or what should I say? I can't find the word. So it just as a tribal working outside the region, outside his own state, has to pay income tax. So it might apply the same way, you know. So then you'll have the same person with having to comply to a different set of laws outside his state and a different law inside his state. I think it just doesn't work.
Exactly. And I think, Siddharth, what I would say is that the real need with regard to this debate is to reorient it from these binaries that I was talking about to the actual talk of real reform. You have to reorient it to real reform and not the binaries of religion and caste and community and regions, etc. And when you reorient it, you also need to see, and perhaps that is why the BJP will not let a certain narrative of actual reform take over from the current narrative of what is pro-Hindu and what is anti-Muslim, etc. Because there are obvious complications for the BJP to bring about a uniform civil code. And like I said, they will face resistance with regard to customs and traditions among Hindus of South India, and that is at a time when the BJP is desperately trying to make inroads in South India. Right. They will have they already have a major crisis of their own creation in the Northeast. They will further deepen that crisis with a push for uniformity in customary laws.
Tamil Nadu has already said it is not accepting it.
Is not accepting it. And I think the biggest problem, because for a lot of us citizens, we always unfortunately have to be explained things in a transactional manner. So when you talk about uniformity, what happens to the Hindu undivided family?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
The income tax exemptions that are given to HUF families under the sections of 80C, 80D, 80BBB, and 112A of the Income Tax Act. This is perhaps the only country where being a Hindu allows you tax concessions. I mean, income tax is supposed to be a secular thing. It has to apply to citizens uniformly, if we're talking about uniformity. So how can you have a tax law that exempts only a certain class of Hindus, not even all Hindus, again, only those who qualify under
Hindu undivided family,
so if you do away with the HUF, is the BJP, will the BJP firstly dare to do away with HUF? If it does, will it not face a backlash from the same Hindus who currently are cheerleaders of the UCC, because they have been told that this is only going to hurt the Muslims?
Right. Yeah. So purely, the debate is really interesting, and due to the paucity of time, I'll just raise this one last point, is that Puneet, even during the 2019 BJP's manifesto, it read that UCC would be formed by taking the best practices of various religions and tailoring them to the modern times. But this very idea of actually taking the best practices of various religions and collating them into one monolithic formulation, that itself is problematic, and it won't be accepted since we are living in a plural society.
No,
Siddharth,
but
I
look,
think I've already
let
taken
me,
a
let
lot
me,
of time and chipped into the time of Ms. Mukim and
yeah.
Ms. Soman. So apologies for that. I would rather want to Ms. Mukim and Ms. Soman to weigh in on this question than
Yeah,
me
yeah,
tackling it all.
surely, anybody, yeah.
No, I have this one question. The BJP had all of 5 years. It never raised this issue. So why now? The timing. No. And having said that, I think when you talk of reforms, I don't think it can be imposed by any government. It has to be internally engineered. Otherwise, it's not going to work. People will not agree to anything that's imposed. And what will happen is you'll violate all the laws. And there are many, many violations even today, which the Supreme Court cannot do anything about. Forget about these local courts and all. You have cases here where a man abandons a wife and then goes and lives with another woman. But because he's not employed in the formal sector, it becomes very difficult for the woman to fight for maintenance. These are very tricky issues that need to be resolved internally. And I think over here, the traditional institutions are engaging with it and all. That is a much more acceptable way than an imposition, a top-down kind of thing.
Yeah, that is Ms. Soman,
Yeah,
could you?
so I
Yeah,
also feel that legal reform is, just one part of a very important process of social reform. So one, legal reform has to, be aided and abetted by social reform and vice versa. Both the things matter. I would also like to say that despite of the constitution and despite of so many laws, we remain a very, very male dominated and patriarchal society, and that will continue despite laws. And third point, which we have not discussed, somehow it has slipped our sort of minds this time. When you're talking of a uniform civil code, we have to make room for same-sex marriages. We have to criminalize marital rape. We have to allow permission to all women across all faiths and ethnicities to enter all religious places of worship. We have to put an end to vigilanteism in the name of love jihad, because Indian citizens are free to marry a person of their choice. We have to put an end to honor killings. We have to revisit the age of consent, because POCSO revision has criminalized sex between teenagers. It is now 18 is the age of sex. So a lot of young boys and girls who are in love, the boys get picked up and are jailed. So when you talk about bringing about modernity, as you were saying, Siddharth, that taking all the best practices and sort of putting them together in a modern context, then these are some of the key issues which have very contradictory stands from those in power that they've taken in the Supreme Court. So these questions also need to be put across to the Law Commission, which is gathering suggestions. So, but I would definitely give, because as a Muslim woman, I have been part of it and I agree with all that we all are saying. I have to definitely give credit to the Prime Minister and to the BJP, because for the first time, a lot of people are now saying that no, Muslim laws need to be reformed. Because, to get people to say that appeared impossible in the last 20 years that we have been demanding codified Muslim family laws. So it's a small step forward for us. So I have to say that, because I come from this kind of a work background. So yeah, but we remain a patriarchal society, and the people who are today pushing for uniform civil code, we all know what is their commitment to gender justice and gender equality. We have seen remission being granted to rapists. We have seen every gender crime
Right. So, anybody would like to give the closing comments? And it's open for anybody. Puneet, if you want to, close the show with the closing comments.
No, I think the points that Ms. Soman just made on the issues that we did not touch upon, I think those actually are burning issues that need to be addressed. But as I said earlier, and as the other speakers said earlier, it's unfortunate that this is such a the entire discussion around the Uniform Civil Code has always taken such a kind of linear and one-sided, sort of an approach, that issues which really need reform, just completely take a backseat. And that is where a major part of the problem lies with regard to any kind of reform governing marriage, inheritance, divorce, etc. That you approach it with a certain mindset, whereas and with a kind of politics or a political element or vote bank considerations, that it does not give a lot of confidence to people who actually want to see reform.
Okay. Yeah. So I thank all the panelists today for such insightful comments and actually breaking down this complex issue. Obviously, 40 or 50 minutes is actually not enough to discuss all the points, but I think we have managed to touch upon the important and pivotal points that actually revolve around the UCC and the entire debate around it. So I thank you all once again, and we hope to continue this discussion as the issue keeps going on. Thank you once again.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.